Okay, I think this is going to be the concluding video to chapter 18, which is a concluding chapter to The Rape of the Mind by Mind.wmv. It is the building up of our personality and our conscience, ego and superego, that is important. Nor can this development be brought about in an enforced and compulsive way as tyrants and dictators try to do. We must develop it through free acceptance or rejection of existing moral values until the inner moral person in us is so strong that he is able to go beyond existing values and can stand on his own moral grounds. The choice in favor of freedom lies between self-chosen limitation, the liberation from chaos, and the pseudo-freedom of unconscious chaos. To many people, freedom is an emotional concept of letting themselves go, which really means a dictatorship by dark instinctual drives. There is also an intellectual concept of freedom, meaning a limiting of bondage and unfreedom. In order to become free, certain outside conditions must be prevented from hampering this moral development of self-control. We have to become increasingly aware of the internal dangers of democracy, laxity, laziness, and unawareness. People have to be aware of the tendency of technology to automatize their minds. They have to become aware of the fact that mass media and modern communication are able to imprint all kinds of suggestions on our brains. They have to know that education can turn us either into weak factories or strong personalities. A free democracy has to fight against mediocrity in order not to be smothered by mere numbers of automatic votes. Democratic freedom requires a highly intelligent appraisal and understanding of the democratic system itself. This very fact makes it difficult for us to advertise or promote it. Furthermore, inculcating democracy is just as dangerous as inculcating totalitarianism. It is the essence of democracy that it must be self-chosen, it cannot be imposed. The paradox of freedom. Freedom and planning present no essential contrasts. In order to let freedom grow, we have to plan our controls over the forces that limit freedom. Beyond this, we must have the passion and the inner freedom to prosecute those who abuse freedom. We must have the vitality to attack those who commit mental suicide and psychic murder through abuse of liberties, dragging down the other persons in their wake. Suicidal submission is a kind of subversion from within. It is passive surrender to a mechanized world without personalities. It is the denial of personality. We must have the fervor to stand firmly for freedom of the individual, for mutual tolerance and dignity. And we must learn not to tolerate the destruction of these values. We must not tolerate those who make use of worthy ideas and values only to destroy them as soon as they are in power. We must be intolerant of these abuses as long as the battle for mental life or death goes on. It cannot be emphasized too strongly that liberty is only possible with a strong set of beliefs and moral standards. This means that man has to adhere to self-restrictive rules, moral rules, in order to keep his freedom. Where there is lack of such internal checks, owing to lack of education or to stereotyped education, then external pressure or even tyranny becomes necessary to check unsocial drives. Then freedom becomes the victim of man's inability to live in freedom and self-control. Mankind should be guaranteed the right not to hear and not to conform, and the right to defense against psychological attack and against intervention in the form of perverted mass propaganda, totalitarian pressure, and mental torture. No compromise or appeasement is possible in dealing with such attitudes. We have to watch carefully lest our own mistakes in attacking personal freedom become grist for the totalitarian's mill. Even our denunciation may have a paradoxical effect. Fear and hysteria further totalitarianism. What we need is careful analysis and understanding of such phenomena. Democracy is the regime of the dignity of man and his right to think for himself, the right to have his own opinion. More than that, the right to assert his own opinion and to protect himself against mental invasion and coercion. When the United Nations has devised rules curtailing menticide and psychological intrusion, it will have ensured a human right as precious as physical existence, the right of the non-conforming free individual, the right to dissent, the right to be oneself, Tolerance of criticism and heresy is one of the conditions of freedom. Here we touch on another crucial point related to the technique of governing people. There is a relationship between over-centralization of government, mass participation, and totalitarianism. Mass participation in government without the decentralization that emphasizes the value of variation and individuality, and without the possibility of sound selection of leaders, facilitates the creation of the dictatorial leader. The masses then transfer their desire for power to him. The slave participates in a magic way in the glory of the master. Democratic self-government is determined by restraint and self-limitations, by sportsmanship and fairness, by voluntary observance of the rules of society and cooperation. These qualities come through training. In a democratic government, those who have been elected to responsible positions request controls and limitations against themselves, knowing that no one is without fault. Democracy is not a fight for independence, but a mutually regulated interdependence. A mutually regulated interdependence. That's what it says. Democracy means checking man's tendency to gather unlimited power unto himself. It means checking the faults in each of us. It minimizes the consequences of man's limitations. The future age of psychology. Let me repeat what I said at the very beginning of this book. The modern techniques of brainwashing and menticide, those perversions of psychology, can bring almost any man into submission and surrender. Many of the victims of thought control, brainwashing, and menticide that we have talked about were strong men whose minds and wills were broken and degraded. But although the totalitarians use their knowledge of the mind for vicious and unscrupulous purposes, our democratic society can and must use its knowledge to help man to grow, to guard his freedom, and to understand himself. Psychological knowledge and psychological treatment may in themselves generate the democratic attitude, for psychology is essentially the science of the juste milieu, of free choice within the framework of man's personal and social limitations. Compared with the million-year span of human existence and evolution, civilization is still in its infancy. Despite historical reversals, man continues to grow, and psychology, no matter how imperfect now, will become one of man's most powerful tools in his struggle for freedom and maturity. And that, my friends, ends the book, The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing by Juste A.M. Merleau, M.D. And I hope you have enjoyed the book as much as I have enjoyed reading it to you. See you in the next book.